Brill and the Dragators by Peggy Downing. Chapter 9. Prison Visit. The soldiers marched Brill's grandfather to the center of the drawbridge. Grandfather called, "Turn away from your evil ways and turn to Christ who gave his life for you." Emperor Mane stood and waved his arms wildly. "May this emperor's death be a lesson to you all. Everyone who rebels against me will die." Two soldiers picked up Brill's grandfather as he cried, "They who rebel against God are lost for eternity." They hurled him into the moat. A Dragator's large jaws clamped on his frail body and pulled him under the water. It happened so fast that Brill hardly realized it was all over. Prince Grosstare pouted. "I wish the Dragators would eat the people on the surface so we could watch, but they always drag them under. Maybe it's easier to get them away from the other Dragators that way." Brill blinked back tears. He felt as if someone had kicked him in the stomach and the ache radiated through his body. His grandfather had been so brave, using his last breath to tell people about God. "If only I'd listened more closely to Grandfather when I was at home," thought Brill. "Maybe I'd be that brave. Then I wouldn't be so scared to try to help Segra. Grandfather said God loved me and he'd stay close to me." Brill prayed silently. "Lord, help me to rescue Segra. I need your help because I don't know if my plan will work and I'm not brave." Grosstare nudged him. "Come on, Brill, let's go to the palace for the Empire Day banquet." Brill followed him as the royal family walked to the palace dining hall. As everyone sat down, Emperor Mane raised his wineglass for a toast. "Here's to a glorious future where every single rebel will be eliminated. My loyal subjects will all work to make the Empire great." Brill, who sat near the foot of the long table, thought, "The Empire can never be safe or great as long as most of the people are poor and unhappy." Servants brought in serving dishes filled with all sorts of foods. Brill went through the motions of lifting his fork to his mouth, but he couldn't eat much. He thought of his grandfather beyond earthly help and Segra who still needed his help. The parade entertainers returned to dance and do magic tricks and acrobatics. Brill noticed that Florette, sitting by the queen at the head of the T-shaped table, still looked sad. She didn't join in the laughter when two clowns began a mime routine. Brill needed to talk to her, but there hadn't been a chance. As the evening wore on, the Emperor and many of his guests began to show the effects of too much wine. Brill saw Florette leave the head table. Brill too slipped out and caught up with her on the stairway leading to the second floor. He whispered, "Florette, I have a plan to save Segra, but I need your help." "Me? What could I do?" "You're about the same size as Segra. We could go and see her and you two could change places. You should wear a cloak with a hood and then swap clothes with Segra. That way no one will see that your red hair has turned to blonde when Segra escapes wearing your clothes. I'll tie you up so you won't be blamed." Florette's eyes widened in alarm. "But what if bugs crawl on me?" "I'll step on all the bugs before I leave you." I want to help. That cell is so smelly and horrible. I cry every time I think of Segra locked in there. How long would I have to stay?" "Long enough so that Segra and I can escape to the city." "Are you going?" "My life wouldn't be worth much here if I helped Segra escape." "I'll have to think about it." The princess leaned against the gold banister. "We don't have much time. They'll soon move Segra to the palace dungeon. No one escapes from there." "I know." Florette closed her eyes as if she wanted Brill and his dangerous idea to disappear. "How do your servants get by the guards at the drawbridge when you send them to buy something in the city?" "I give them a pass." "Can you get fake passes for Segra and me?" She nodded. "Then you could just walk away. Oh, Brill, I hope it works." "Then you'll help me?" She hesitated. I've never done anything brave before. Oh, I hope the bugs don't crawl on me. I can't stand bugs. We'll go tomorrow morning. What time do you usually wake up? A lot earlier than my lazy brother. Good. Meet me at the garden as soon as you get up. Florette whispered, I'll be there with the passes. She left and Brill returned to his room. Tomorrow, at this time, he'd be free, walking toward home. He and Segra would have to hide in the daytime and walk at night. They could cut across fields and avoid the roads. He kept concentrating on the details of his plan, trying to ignore the fear that made his nerves twitch and long for action. The waiting was the hardest. It was impossible to turn off his imagination, which kept flashing pictures of soldiers pushing him into a cell, or of Grosstare laughing as he was thrown to the Dragators. The next day, Brill arose early and put on his homespuns under his palace clothes. He looked out the window to see heavy rain, so he picked out a black cape left by the prince's former companion. Excitement about seeing his mother again mingled with fear at his great danger. Worries marched like an army through his mind. Could he find his way back to his village? What would he and Segra eat? How would they keep away from the soldiers the emperor would send after them? Brill slipped out of the palace into the garden. He didn't see Florette, so he walked into the orchard and picked a peach. His stomach felt like a hollow gourd, and he hoped the peach would relieve the emptiness. But the gnawing feeling was from fear, and the peach made his stomach gurgle more. He paced among the fruit trees. Where was Florette? Was she too scared to come? Brill stood under an apple tree watching the garden door of the palace. Finally, it opened and a small figure in a brown cape slipped out. Brill ran toward her. It's raining, she complained. That's good, answered Brill. The guards won't wonder why you're wearing your hood. Come on, we have to hurry. Florette followed him as he hurried toward the woods path. He stopped at a hollow tree and pulled out the rope he had borrowed from the groundkeeper's shed. He slipped it under his tunic. He glanced at Florette as the wind blew her cloak aside. Oh no, he cried. Why did you wear a dress decorated with jewels? I wanted Segra to have it. She can sell the jewels to buy food on her journey. But how are we going to pose as peasants with Segra in a jeweled dress? Florette's chin quivered and her eyes filled with tears. I was only trying to help. Brill stopped. I'm sorry I snapped at you. Don't cry. The dress won't show under the cape. Everything will be fine. Florette complained. You'll have all the fun while I'm lying in that horrible cell. You're very brave, Florette. Do you really think so? Oh, yes. Segra and I will never forget you. Florette wiped her eyes. They walked to the prison and found the same guard they had talked to before. He let them into Segra's cell. As soon as he was gone, Brill said, Segra, you and Florette are going to swap clothes and you and I are going to walk out of here. What will the Emperor do to Florette? Cried Segra. We'll make it look as though we forced her to take part in the escape. Hurry, Segra, change clothes before the guard gets back. Brill turned his back on the girls and began stamping on bugs. You're killing all my friends, complained Segra. I hate bugs, said the princess. Segra slipped into Florette's cloak. When you don't have anything else to do, you watch anything that moves. Ugh, how awful! Florette wrinkled her nose. Brill used his rope to knock down cobwebs, and he stepped on the scurrying spiders. The place is debugged, he announced. Could we have the passes to cross the drawbridge? Florette pulled them from the pocket of the cloak Segra was now wearing. Each pass bore the Emperor's gold seal. Florette sat in the darkest corner, and Brill tied her hands behind her and her feet together. He pulled out a clean white handkerchief. I'll have to put a gag in your mouth, otherwise the guards will think that you should have cried out. No, I can't stand to have that cloth in my mouth. Just put it in my lap and I'll pretend I finally managed to spit it out. Segra wet it in her washing water and placed it in Florette's lap. The cell was dark except for the light that came through the courtyard doorway. Brill felt confident the guard wouldn't notice that the figure in the corner was not Segra. By the time the guard came, Segra had pulled the hood over her head. She put a handkerchief in front of her face and sobbed. Brill said, "Princess, you must not cry for Segra. She's a rebel." He took her hand. "Come, we must hurry back to the palace." They walked out the main door and broke into a run, following a path that would lead them to the road and the drawbridge. Brill didn't talk, for he needed all his breath for running. Fear squeezed his lungs and made him short of air. Segra finally cried, "Brill, can't we stop for a minute? I must be weak from being shut in that cell." He stopped. "I wish Florette had let me gag her. I'm afraid if a spider gets close to her, she'll yell. Come on, we've got to keep going." Brill took several steps, then stopped. A squadron of soldiers were marching up the road. He grabbed Segra's hand and pulled her behind a bush. Brill's heart hammered faster than the soldiers' marching feet. He waited until they were out of sight before he stepped out onto the road again. Segra whispered, "I hope they aren't looking for us." "Just regular maneuvers," Brill declared with more confidence than he felt. As they rounded a bend in the road, they saw the drawbridge. "We'll soon be free," said Brill. "Walk normally now. We don't want anyone to think that we're in a great hurry." They stopped at the guardhouse and showed their passes to the sentry. He glanced at the passes and motioned them on. They walked onto the wooden drawbridge. "There's a Dragator!" exclaimed Segra. "It looks like Peachy." "Forget Peachy and walk straight ahead." Behind them, they heard feet and a loud cry. "Close the drawbridge! There's been a prison escape!" Brill took Segra's hand and began to run, but he faced a line of 8 soldiers marching straight toward them. The leader barked, "Go back, now! Nobody leaves this island until we have found the prisoner!" Brill shouted, "We're on an important mission for the palace!" He waved his passes with the golden crescent. The soldiers kept coming. "Our orders are to close the drawbridge." They shoved Brill and Segra back toward the island. The chains clanked as the bridge attendants pulled up the bridge. "Head for the woods," whispered Brill to Segra. But before he could move, he saw that the leader had his big hand clamped on Segra's shoulder. "Who are you?" he barked. "Minto, kitchen maid, going to the city for spices," she answered. He pulled the hood from her head. "This must be the blonde girl we're looking for." Brill felt a strong hand grip his shoulder, pushing his flesh down to the bone. "This was the fellow with her." The soldier pulled Segra's cloak aside. "Look at that dress. Since when does a maid wear dresses with jewels?" "The princess didn't want it anymore. She gave it to me," explained Segra, but she looked at Brill with despair in her eyes. Brill felt sick. His careful plan had failed. The 8 soldiers formed 2 lines of 4 on either side of Brill and Segra. 2 soldiers grabbed Segra's upper arms to lead her. Brill felt the painful pressure of big hands on his upper arms also. The soldiers marched them through the main gate of the palace and straight to the throne room. Brill and Segra were escorted to the emperor, who glared at them with blazing eyes. "You've been living in my palace, eating food and wearing clothes that I've provided, and all the time you were traitors." He waved his podgy arms. "I sentence both of you to die, 1 month from today." End of Chapter 9.